What is up, y'all? It's your boy Aniki coming at you with the latest review for My Hero Academia chapter 329. And as you already know, I don't like to waste time, so we're going to get straight into the meat and potatoes of this chapter. You know, we talk about that the title in the nick of the time, a big time maverick from the West. This is a very critical juncture, obviously, and that's even the first words that you get out of the chapter with All For One, you know, sitting in his throne, posted up with all this Nomu around him. We see that they're actually genuinely ducked off in a cave with, you know, vines hanging down for an entrance like it's some 1970s hippie den. But he says that, you know, we played a game of hide and seek and we have won. And that doesn't make complete sense right away until you get to the end of the chapter where you see that they've already completed their mission, which just means that the 38 days projected time was the goal. Make him complete in 38 days was by the end of this time period, you need to have him completed. That's the goal. That doesn't mean that they couldn't get it done faster. More than likely, some like that regeneration and some of the stuff that with Shigaraki likely just helped. Especially because it might not have necessarily been less than 3 months, but rather almost a full 3 months into it. So we'll see how that goes. Now, his statement that obtaining one for all is the mid-game goal is a fascinating one because it always seemed like the end-game goal for All For One. And obviously he talks about being the ultimate demon lord, and you could have him sitting here being Palpatine or the classic mustache twirler who thinks he's going to get to run everything. But more than that, I also think that there's always been this strangely obsessive nature to One For All For One trying to get One For All. And when you think back to the quotes during the war when he said, "You will be mine, brother," while yes, acquiring One For All is important to him, his long-term goal could actually just simply be to finally have his brother with him. But it's also worth noting that specifically due to the nature of like Vestige for One and the nature of One For All, taking on this power specifically and absorbing it could lead to All For One being able to simply push all of his quirks and everything into someone else, just simply passing it along without any repercussion or concerns. So there's a lot of things that could go into this. Obviously, there's what the heroes have said, and it could truly be just that simple of him trying to take over Shigaraki's body, even though he also, as a vestige, seemed to have zero qualms with the idea of Shigaraki possibly destroying him, which is kind of why I think this always leans into the more of the rule of two area where it's constantly promoting up another Sith. And I think the idea of him permanently being able to bounce from person to person, passing down One For All the same way his brother passed down his legacy might be the real goal here. And due to the nature of One For All, combining with All For One, it, in theory, could also allow him to get around quirk singularity theory and the idea of One For All becoming too powerful for a human body to control. Possibly. I'm not saying it definitely will, but it's definitely possible. Now, when we have him talking about I have heaps of friends all around the globe, I would like to point out that that was one of my big concerns when people were talking about whether or not international heroes could come into play, because of the fact that I was very worried that due to everybody already having higher crime rates, that it would be advantageous or disadvantageous for most nations to try to go to Japan, which was technically the best off nation in the world at the time that this series started. So the fact that All For One wasn't sure, more than likely, if that was actually going to come into play or not, whether or not, you know, they were really truly going to be able to send people in. But to the certain degree, because he even acknowledges, you know, it's a gamble that if he's going to go after Star and Stripe when she's on her way here, that it, you know, there is a risk to this. She's definitely got a powerful quirk. We don't know what it is yet, but it very much seems to be the case that like her power, if he can win, will be very critical. So I'm kind of excited to see what it is, whether it's another stockpiling power or, you know, like for example, let's say she just happened to be descended from somebody who had a stockpile, like a power similar to the original stockpile concept that we had. But by this time now, you know, it's gotten to have a couple of extra children, go down some generations, evolve, become more complicated, and thus become a more powerful quirk. Now, the thing that I find fascinating about this spinner aspect of this story is because, one, he's dedicated himself to protecting All For One. And it's worth noting that during the story, it's directly stated that the person that Spinner is most loyal to is not All For One or any of that other stuff, but specifically Shigaraki. Now, him wanting to be loyal to Shigaraki and seeing the way that Vestige for One kind of took over his body, the way he challenged him on not being the guy that he chose to follow, there's a chance that the real reason Spinner is close to All For One is not to protect him, but to eventually kill him. And, you know, the whole, it's his job, his name to spin the tale. And he was talking about spinning Stain's will into reality. But ultimately, the future that Spinner sees and the future that Spinner desires is not one where All For One is at the top, but one where the League of Villains and Shigaraki is. And in turn, I think that while quirks are heavily influential on personality, and that's why, you know, they said Spinner could never become a person of meaning because his quirk influences him to just latch on to ideologies and other people, it would be a good moment for him to step beyond what would be considered the personality limit of his quirk, to go forth and take this initiative to ensure, as like the blade of Shigaraki as his right hand, as his most loyal follower, to ensure that he gets on the throne and not All For One, especially since All For One was pretentious enough to sneak a throne into his mind. So that's kind of where I think Spinner's mindset is. And one of the things that I've always enjoyed about All For One is that he always has this classic capitalist businessman politician angle. And when he starts talking about the way that Spinner is a heteromorph and, you know, he's faced a lot of discrimination, he's utilizing effectively the oppression of the marginalized to hopefully create a campaign that would enable him to take more power while exploiting them, while not truly caring about who Spinner is as a person. Let's be real. He doesn't care about these people in total. He just cares about the result that having them on his side is, and which is a perfect example of the way politicians often use either people's fear of minority groups or the fears of that minority groups have to exploit them and try to get their vote and get them to be on their side, even with matching campaign posters to further highlight how this is a political movement. And I kind of love the fact that My Hero is always focused on the socio-political aspects and kind of shown that if you want to run something, you cannot just use power, even if you are extremely powerful. Like we had talked about, many of us have talked about this, or at least those who have been on the streams with me and, you know, who have been around. The advisors are finally coming into play. It was kind of obvious when you think back to the fact that Makia ran through and created a path, and then when you think about the fact that Gas Mask was able to walk past, go up, kill Midnight, and we don't know where he ended up. Sure, Majestic and them pulled up and tried to help the kids, but that doesn't change the fact that they basically flew there, which means that the route through the trees that those people were taking was not necessarily one that they were going to be able to 100%, you know, prevent everybody from getting there. And it's worth noting that, you know, it's Spinner's followers and his top advisors, which were stated to be at the level of pro heroes anyway. So now that, and then we talk about something even further, which is the Great Skeptic. Now, him going through, taking all these camera angles and all this other stuff, creating the Deka footage, and then taking that and making it into a propaganda where instead of it being twice clones, it was, you know, 20 unique looking villains, which I also want to point out that the reason why that trick was so successful is that by Twice having that costume, it effectively allowed anything that looked like Twice to be edited, similar to the effect of a green screen. We finally get a hint of Toga. Her hair is wild, so we know she's just kind of been out in these streets. But it's worth noting that there's articles posted that are designed to paint Toga as a good person who happens to be lost out, and it's a tragedy. Now, there's something about this sign that, and you can't see all the words, but it says great, and it looks like great power within gathering, Paranormal Liberation front. Neutrality is a sin. And more than likely, this is to say that if you were the kind of person who saw the way that heteromorphs were treated, or you think back to how Deku made the mistake of saying, like, everybody's just scared, when in reality, those people who attacked Ordinary Girl were just being discriminatory, which might even be the reason why Kohei Horikoshi is calling her Ordinary Girl, because she's a fox lady or a shark lady or a mouse lady, whatever you think she is, does not mean that she is not an ordinary person just like everyone else. That is what he's driving home with that. And then you even have the Death to Hero Society graffiti. So there's just all these little details that I hope everybody's picking up on, because it's gonna matter as we go forward. And one of the things that I also want to take note of is that All For One refers to Dabi as young Toya, And I've always wondered why Dabi got so much preferential treatment from Dr. Ujiko. And I think that we might finally be getting more and more explanations on where Dabi was eventually as a teenager, and that Ujiko putting him back together, giving him the patchwork treatment, might have been a part of that. Now, whether or not Dabi fully remembers interacting with them back in the day as a teenager is an entirely other story, especially with the way quirks work. And if you remember, even Giron, for example, had the quirk Muddy, which he was able to just shake your head a little and all of a sudden you couldn't remember the last 10 minutes. So we have these different reasons. And again, how did Toya live? How did, to a certain degree, he's kind of Frankenstein's monster, and he works just like that, like a reference to that. And who would be better to put him back together and keep him functioning than Ujiko, aka, sorry, I almost used his canceled name, Kyudai Garaki. So now, there's an important part of this chapter that I think it's easy to miss, and it kind of ties back in with the end. So when we talk about Tomura Shigaraki, no, actually, I'm going to do that. So first off, I want to just cycle through. So we see, they're talking about hold them sacred and endow them with divinity. We're going to come back to that part. We're going to come back to the part about endowing them with divinity. So we obviously get the quick cutaway of Hawks and Genus talking about, okay, she's going to be in our airspace. We see Endeavor still flying over the ocean. Hawks, Genus in the vehicle trying to get there. And that's when they get the alert that he's shown himself. So that part wasn't really that important because they were kind of just bantering, talking about how she could end up on the hook for this and it could cause serious issues. Are they going to throw the book at her? Maybe her reckless nature is going to come into our favor. And then, they talk about how Shigaraki's here. Now, I want to talk about that imbuing them with divinity part, because it's very, very important that the first shot of Shigaraki we get is not his face. It's technically his cloak, depending on how you're reading it. But most importantly, it is his palm with the emphasis on his stigmata. Now, I want you to focus on this because stigmata are typically associated with Christ. They are specifically meant to be you resonating with Christ. And that's when there's even a movie called Stigmata where I believe like the people during the rapture start getting the wounds on their hands to show that they're like aligned with God. So as Star and Stripe is pulling up with the band of bombers, which that in of itself is important because if Skeptic still has access to his satellites, he can watch this fight. He can document that the US sent bombers without them actually being vetted or approved to Japan, painting it as a hostile attack from Japan, from the United States on Japan, led by the number one hero of the United States, leading to more upheaval, more social dissension around the globe, and further resentment, allowing the anti-hero society sentiment to spread globally. Now, Star and Stripe ask Shigaraki, what are you the villain they call All for One? And Shigaraki says, good question. What exactly am I? Now, it's easy to look at this and just simply go, oh yeah, because, he's been getting experimented on. He's, all these other things, and he's barely a human. But I think that the emphasis of this ties back to that stigmata. When he says, what exactly am I? He is now questioning whether he should even be considered a villain. He is asking if he is implying that the Meta Liberation Army is correct when they call him the savior. He is not a villain. He's always, when he was younger, he wanted to be a hero. And what he's doing is effectively saving his friends as far as he's concerned and wiping out what he doesn't like. Shigaraki is embracing his role as the liberator and the savior by asking this question. Am I actually a villain? Is that what people will think when they see you fighting me in the air, coming into a country's airspace with no legal clearance? What exactly are people going to think? Now, keep in mind that we don't know if these are manned bombers, and we don't know enough about Star and Stripe's quirk yet. For all we know, that she could have the ability to control bomber jets, and that's secretly all that it takes to get that, but I doubt it. So, now think about this. You're going to have airspace, Shigaraki and Star and Stripe get in a fight in an inopportune battle. Whether she goes down or not is not as important as the ramifications of her being here, period. Now, Star and Stripe goes down, boom. We know that Shigaraki's really strong. He manages to acquire her quirk, and all of a sudden, whether All For One stays control or Shigaraki, finally goes and wastes him, it's not as important. Here, what is important here for this part is what they can do with this information. Yes, I don't have a problem with Star and Stripe dying. I'm not worried about the massacre of muscle mommy milkers like a lot of you guys are. I care about the story. And so I just kind of want to point out that even ignoring like, oh, is Shigaraki going to steal the quirk? Is he going to have that ability? That's not the only thing that matters here. It genuinely comes down to whether or not this is going to be recorded, whether it's going to be distributed. And then furthermore, depending on how bad she loses this fight, if she loses it, or how bad this fight goes, it can completely deter heroes from around the world from even wanting to come. Because while the heroes around the world are definitely trapping and they're definitely in it real hard, that doesn't mean that they want to go to a place that just got as bad as they did with a dude more powerful than the worst things that they deal with. So they're going to try to clean house at home and, build a base and be safe then. This is the event that I think can easily lead to the students having to flee. But what's more, so just kind of factor that in. And then the one thing I also want to say that's really cool about this is that the shot of Star and Stripe next to the shot of Shigaraki specifically I'm fond of, partially because Star and Stripe gets these little polka dots in her drawing sometimes, which is just very reminiscent of the classic US comic style. So it's like a little nod to that. And then when you see that Shigaraki is constantly getting like these Renaissance painting-esque treatments so that he looks like, Jesus in so many depictions and all these other things as an Antichrist figure. It's just really beautifully done artistically. And I'm just here for it. This is just a great chapter. I like where we're going in the story. I kind of see Star and Stripe as the next Mirio, a cocksure, blonde hair, blue-eyed, super powerful quirk user that could have come out of that. Could have been the next All Might, so to speak, who could have been, the successor, the one on the throne, especially if she was actually a student of All Might, who is going up against the main villain here, or the guy who's like the top gun of this arc, and potentially losing her life / quirk as a lesson. And even if she does lose her quirk, I think that could open the door to her trying to get one for all and arguing that she's a better candidate, and since she's now quirkless, she would be technically viable to wield it. I'm not guaranteeing that that's the direction it's going to go, but that's just something that we got to look at as being potentially on the table. So yeah, that's just, now think about that. Now once again though, I just want to say that we shall endow them with divinity kind of comes into building an entire mythology and elevating all these people. And when you think about the fact that Dabi himself also has a lot of Lucifer parallels that we can get into later, or parallels with Satan within the context of My Hero Academia, it really starts to shine where it, those of you who've known about the Shinrikyo know this has already been kind of a cautionary tale on how cults recruit, how society creates its own problems by underserving and underprotecting its people, and we're just only diving into these themes more, and we're only embracing that narrative more. So I'm really looking forward to how they're going to execute on this down the road. I hope you guys are enjoying these chapters and able to enjoy what Horikoshi's putting on the table here. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. If you enjoy it, if you want to say something, obviously leave that comment. Share if you think it's something that I've provided some insight that maybe you didn't get in other My Hero Academia YouTubers. Let me know what you guys think though. Have a wonderful day. I'm Anaki, and I am out.